Officer Desmond Cole saw his reflection move 3 seconds after he did. He stood frozen in that Victorian house at 2:47 a.m., watching himself in the antique mirror. But his reflection was always just a heartbeat behind, like it was learning his movements, studying him. The couple who called it in were huddled in the corner, whispering the same thing over and over. Don't look directly at them. He uses them to watch. Desmond tried to radio for backup, but when he lifted the radio to his mouth, his reflection lifted it to its ear, listening. That's when he understood. He wasn't looking at his reflection anymore. His reflection was looking at him. Tonight, you're about to hear 5 stories that police departments buried in closed case files, 5 nights that changed officers forever, 5 encounters that prove some calls never really end. They just wait for the next person to answer. These aren't urban legends or creepypasta. These are based on real incident reports, real testimonies, real people who clocked in for a normal shift and clocked out knowing they'd seen something that shouldn't exist. From a welfare check where the deceased had been cared for weeks after death, to a high-speed chase where the victims begged not to be rescued, to a radio station broadcasting from the future. These are the stories that never made the news because no one would believe them. But the officers who lived through them, they believe. They have no choice. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon, because once you hear what Officer Isaiah Grant picked up on Highway 49, once you know what was really in that passenger seat next to him for 14 minutes of dead air on his body cam, you'll understand why some stories need to be heard. 5 officers walked into the darkness. 5 officers walked back out. But what walked out with them? What followed them home? What still watches them through mirrors and radios and the empty seats of their patrol cars? That's what you're about to discover. This is 5 true disturbing police horror stories. And I promise you, by the time we reach the end, you'll be checking your rearview mirror tonight. Let's begin with Officer Marcus Hendricks and the welfare check that should have been routine. The one where he found Mrs. Delacroix dead for 3 weeks in a spotless house with fresh food in the refrigerator. And the security camera footage that showed someone, or something, still caring for her long after her heart stopped beating. Story 1. The welfare check. Officer Marcus Hendricks had been with the Missouri State Police for 8 years, and in that time, he'd seen plenty of death. Car accidents, overdoses, the occasional hunting mishap out in the rural counties where farmland stretched for miles and neighbors could live a half-hour apart by car. But he'd never seen anything like what he found at 1247 Mercy Lane on that October evening. The call came in just after sunset, one of those routine welfare checks that usually ended with an embarrassed elderly person apologizing for worrying their church group. Mrs. Delacroix, age 73, hadn't shown up to Sunday service in 3 weeks, and the pastor was concerned. Marcus took the call because he was in the area anyway, finishing up paperwork on a fender bender near the county line. He expected to find her watching television, maybe a little hard of hearing, possibly annoyed at the intrusion. He did not expect to find her sitting upright in her favorite armchair, dead for what the coroner would later estimate to be 21 days. The house looked perfect. That was the first thing that struck Marcus as wrong. He'd knocked for 5 minutes, announced himself as police, and finally used the hide-a-key the pastor had told him about, the one under the ceramic frog by the front steps. The moment he opened the door, he smelled it, that distinct sweetness of decay that every cop learns to recognize, the smell that clings to your uniform and follows you home. But everything else was immaculate. The hardwood floors gleamed, not a speck of dust on the furniture. The kitchen counters were spotless, and when Marcus walked past the sink, he noticed it was bone dry, not even a water spot. In the living room, Mrs. Delacroix sat in her chair facing the window, hands folded in her lap, wearing a clean blue dress. Her skin had taken on that waxy, grayish quality, and her eyes were sunken. But someone had closed them. Someone had positioned her carefully, almost lovingly. Marcus called it in, his voice steady despite the crawling sensation working its way up his spine. While waiting for the coroner and the crime scene unit, Marcus did what he was trained to do. He cleared the house, checked every room, every closet, every space where someone could hide. Nobody. He photographed everything, made notes, tried to piece together what had happened. In the kitchen, he found fresh food in the refrigerator. Not just non-perishables, but fresh food. A half-gallon of milk with an expiration date 4 days in the future. A package of sliced turkey from the deli counter, date stamped from 2 days ago. A bowl of cut fruit, strawberries and melon, covered in plastic wrap, still bright and fresh. Marcus opened the trash can. It was empty, but it had been recently lined with a new bag. He could smell the faint scent of lemon cleaner. The bathroom was the same. Fresh towels, folded and hung precisely. The toilet bowl was clean, a blue tablet fizzing in the tank. Her bedroom was neat as a pin, bed made with hospital corners, not a wrinkle in the floral comforter. On her nightstand sat a glass of water, and when Marcus touched it, condensation wet his fingertips. The water was cold, ice cold, fresh. The crime scene unit arrived, and Marcus explained what he'd found. They processed everything, took samples, dusted for prints. Mrs. Delacroix had no signs of trauma, no defensive wounds, nothing to suggest foul play. She'd simply died, probably a heart attack or stroke, and had been sitting in that chair decomposing for 3 weeks. But someone had been in this house. Someone had been taking care of it, taking care of her. The lead investigator, a woman named Chen who'd been doing this twice as long as Marcus, pulled him aside after they bagged the body. She'd found something he'd missed. In the corner of the living room, mounted near the ceiling, was a small security camera. Mrs. Delacroix's son had installed it 6 months ago when he moved to Colorado, just so he could check in on his mother remotely. The camera fed to a cloud storage account. Chen had the login information from the son, who was now on a plane back to Missouri. She pulled up the footage on her tablet right there in the living room, and Marcus watched over her shoulder. The timestamp showed Mrs. Delacroix dying on September 19th at 4:47 p.m. She'd been watching her stories, the afternoon soap operas she never missed, when she simply stopped breathing. Her head tilted slightly to the left. Her hands, which had been holding her knitting, went slack. The needles and yarn tumbled to the floor. For several hours, nothing happened. The room grew dark. The television kept playing, flickering blue light across her body. Then, at 11:32 p.m., something moved in the kitchen. Marcus felt his throat go dry. Chen enhanced the footage, but the kitchen was just outside the camera's main field of view. They could see shadows, movement, but no clear image. Whatever it was moved like a person, upright, bipedal. It opened the refrigerator. They could hear it, the sound picked up by the camera's microphone. The light from the fridge spilled into the living room. Then the door closed, and the shadow moved back toward the living room. Chen fast-forwarded. Every day, the same pattern. The shadow appeared, always between 11 p.m. and midnight. It cleaned. It straightened. On day 4, it closed Mrs. Delacroix's eyes. On day 7, it changed her dress, somehow maneuvering her decomposing body with what looked like practiced care. On day 12, it brought in fresh groceries. They watched it unpack them in the kitchen, putting items away in the exact spots where Mrs. Delacroix had kept them. The milk in the door, the deli meat in the drawer, the fruit in the crisper. On day 18, it scrubbed the floors. Marcus could hear the sound of the mop bucket, the splash of water. On day 20, just 2 days before Marcus arrived, the shadow stood in front of Mrs. Delacroix for a long time. The footage showed it reaching out, and though they couldn't see clearly, it looked like it was touching her face. Gently, the way you'd touch someone you loved. Chen tried to enhance the footage, to get a clear image of whatever had been in that house. The tech team worked on it for hours, running it through filters and programs. But every time they got close, the image would distort, pixelate, become nothing but static and shadows. It was as if whatever it was knew exactly where the camera could see and where it couldn't, as if it was deliberately staying just out of focus. The only clear shot they got was from the final night, day 21, the night before Marcus arrived. At 11:47 p.m., the shadow stood directly in front of the camera. For just a moment, less than a second, the image cleared. What Marcus saw in that frozen frame made him request a transfer to a different county. He never talked about it, not officially. But late one night at a cop bar 3 years later, after too many whiskeys, he told another officer what he'd seen. The face on the screen had been Mrs. Delacroix's face. But it wasn't her reflection, wasn't some trick of the light. It was her face on a body that was too tall, too thin, too wrong. And it was smiling. Not the warm smile of an old woman who loved her grandchildren, but something else entirely. Something that looked like love, but felt like hunger. The son sold the house without ever setting foot in it again. The new owners lasted 3 months before they moved out, claiming they heard footsteps at night, always around 11:30, always moving from the kitchen to the living room. They said they'd wake up to find their things rearranged, put away in places they never kept them, organized by someone else's logic. The house has been empty now for 5 years. But if you drive past it late at night, sometimes you can see a light in the kitchen window, flickering on at 11:32 p.m., right on schedule. And if you're foolish enough to look closely, you might see a shadow moving inside. Still cleaning, still caring for a house where no one lives anymore. Still waiting, perhaps, for the next person who needs to be taken care of. Marcus Hendricks doesn't drive down Mercy Lane anymore. He takes the long way around, even though it adds 20 minutes to his patrol route. Because he knows what he saw on that security footage. He knows that whatever was in Mrs. Delacroix's house wasn't trying to harm her. It was trying to keep her. And the worst part, the part that wakes him up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, is knowing that somewhere out there, in another quiet house on another quiet street, someone else has just stopped breathing in their favorite chair. And something is already on its way to take care of them. Story 2. Highway 49. Officer Reina Vasquez's dashboard camera recorded everything that happened that night on Highway 49. But the department sealed the footage and buried it so deep that even requesting it through Freedom of Information would get you stonewalled. Reina knows because she tried. She wanted proof that what she saw was real, that she hadn't lost her mind out there in the Arizona desert at 2:47 in the morning. She never got the footage, but she doesn't need it anymore. She remembers every single second. It plays in her head then every time she closes her eyes, every time she drives past that stretch of highway, every time she sees a vehicle with blacked-out windows. The night started like any other graveyard shift on highway patrol. Quiet miles of empty desert road and the occasional drunk driver weaving between lanes. Reina had been a state trooper for 6 years, and she'd worked this route hundreds of times. She knew every mile marker, every rest stop, every place where speeders like to open up their engines thinking nobody was watching. At 2:47 a.m., she clocked a silver sedan doing 93 in a 65 zone, weaving slightly, but not enough to suggest intoxication. Standard traffic stop. She hit the lights and pulled up behind the vehicle, expecting the usual routine of license and registration, maybe a field sobriety test if the driver seemed impaired. The sedan pulled over immediately, which was the first thing that felt wrong. Most speeders hesitate, they slow down gradually. They look for a good spot to pull over. This driver stopped within seconds, right there on the shoulder with no streetlights around. Nothing but empty desert stretching into darkness on both sides. Raina approached the driver's side window with her flashlight, hand resting on her service weapon like she'd been trained. The window rolled down before she even reached it. The driver was a man in his 40s, clean cut, wearing a polo shirt and khakis like he'd just left an office job. His hands were on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, exactly where they should be. He looked terrified. Not the normal nervousness of someone getting pulled over, but genuine, bone-deep terror. His eyes were wide, his breathing rapid and shallow, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool desert air. Raina asked for his license and registration, and his hands shook so badly he could barely get his wallet out. His name was David Keller, and according to his license, he was from Flagstaff. Clean record, no warrants. Nothing to explain the absolute panic radiating off him. Raina asked if he'd been drinking. He shook his head, words tumbling out too fast. No drinking. He was sorry for speeding. He just needed to get somewhere. Needed to keep moving. Needed to not stop. That's when Raina noticed the windows. The rear windows of the sedan were blacked out completely, tinted so dark she couldn't see through them at all. Illegal in Arizona. She mentioned it, and David's face went even paler. He started talking faster, saying he didn't know about the windows. The car wasn't his. He'd borrowed it. He just needed to go. Raina's instincts were screaming now. Something was very wrong. She asked David to step out of the vehicle. He opened his mouth to comply, and that's when something slammed against the inside of the rear passenger window. Hard. The entire car rocked from the impact. Raina jumped back, hand on her weapon, flashlight trained on that black window. She couldn't see anything through the tint, but she'd heard it. Something inside the car had hit that window with enough force to shake a 2-ton sedan. David's eyes went even wider, and he whispered 3 words that made Raina's blood run cold. "They're still awake." Before Raina could respond, before she could even process what he'd said, David slammed the car into drive and floored it. Tires screamed, gravel sprayed, and the sedan rocketed back onto the highway. Raina ran back to her cruiser, called it in, and pursued. The chase lasted 17 minutes and covered 32 miles of desert highway. David drove like a man possessed, hitting speeds over 120 miles per hour, swerving around the few other vehicles on the road, running red lights at intersections. Raina stayed on him, calling for backup, watching her dashboard camera record everything. And throughout the entire chase, she could see movement in the back of that sedan. Shadows pressing against those blacked-out windows. Multiple shadows. Things that moved wrong, that seemed to flow more than shift, that slammed against the glass over and over, like they were trying to break through. At one point, the rear window cracked. Not shattered, but spiderwebbed from the inside out, as if something with enormous strength had punched it. David kept driving, kept accelerating, and Raina realized with growing horror that he wasn't trying to escape from her. He was trying to escape from whatever was in his back seat. Backup arrived at mile marker 47. 3 more highway patrol units, 2 county sheriff's vehicles, and a spike strip. David never slowed down. He hit the spike strip at 80 miles per hour, all 4 tires exploded, and the sedan skidded sideways in a shower of sparks and smoke before finally slamming into the guardrail. Officers surrounded the vehicle, weapons drawn, shouting commands. David stumbled out, hands up, sobbing. He was screaming something, over and over, but it took Raina a moment to understand what he was saying. "Don't open it. Don't open the back doors. Please, God, don't open it." The senior officer on scene, a sergeant named Mallory, approached the sedan with 2 other troopers. They could see the cracked rear window, could see the shadows moving behind that illegal tint. Mallory called for David to tell them who was in the car. David collapsed to his knees, still sobbing, and said 3 people. He'd picked up 3 hitchhikers 6 hours ago, just outside of Phoenix. They'd seemed normal at first. A man and 2 women, all in their 20s, all polite and grateful for the ride. But somewhere around midnight, they'd asked him to pull over. Said they needed to get something from the trunk. David had pulled over, and when he got out to open the trunk for them, they'd climbed into the back seat and unlocked the doors from the inside. When David got back in the car, they told him to drive. Told him not to stop, not to look back, not to try to open the rear doors. Told him that if he did, they would have to show him what they really were, and he wouldn't survive seeing it. David had been driving for 6 hours straight, terrified, watching in his rearview mirror as the 3 people in his back seat slowly stopped looking like people. Their movements became fluid, wrong. Their shapes seemed to blur at the edges, and they whispered to him, constantly, describing things they shouldn't know. They described David's childhood home in detail, room by room. They described his mother's funeral, which had happened 3 months ago. They described his nightmares, the specific recurring one where his teeth fell out one by one. They knew things no stranger could know, and they whispered them in voices that sounded less human with every mile. Mallory looked at Raina, and Raina saw her own fear reflected back. But they had a job to do. Mallory approached the rear passenger door, announced himself as police, and ordered whoever was inside to exit the vehicle with their hands visible. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the door opened. 3 people stepped out. They looked completely normal. The man was wearing jeans and a jacket. The 2 women wore casual clothes, both carrying small backpacks. They looked tired, maybe a little confused, but utterly, completely human. They identified themselves, showed their IDs, and explained that yes, David had picked them up, and yes, they'd been in the back seat. But they'd been asleep most of the time. They had no idea why David was saying these things. They seemed genuinely concerned about him. Suggested maybe he'd been driving too long, maybe he'd been hallucinating. The officers searched them, searched the car, and found nothing. No weapons, no drugs. Nothing to explain David's terror or the cracked window or the way he was still on the ground, refusing to look at them, whispering, "That's not what they look like. That's not what they look like. That's not what they really are." The 3 hitchhikers were detained for questioning, but within hours, they were released. No evidence of any crime, no reason to hold them. They walked away from the police station at dawn, heading north on foot, and that was the last anyone saw of them. Officially, anyway. David Keller was taken to a hospital for psychiatric evaluation. He was incoherent, insisting that the 3 people who got out of his car weren't the same 3 people who got in. He said the real ones were still in there, hiding behind human faces, wearing human shapes like costumes. He was sedated, observed for 72 hours, and eventually released with a prescription for anti-anxiety medication and a court date for reckless endangerment. He never showed up to court. 2 weeks after the incident, David's car was found abandoned at a rest stop outside of Flagstaff, the one where he'd originally picked up the hitchhikers. The rear windows had been smashed out from the inside. There was blood on the back seat, but it didn't match David's blood type. It didn't match any human blood type. The DNA came back as inconclusive, which was the word the lab used when they had no idea what they were looking at. David Keller himself was never seen again. His apartment was empty, his belongings still there, his phone and wallet left on his kitchen counter. He'd simply vanished, as if he'd walked out of his life and into something else. Reina Vasquez still works Highway 49, but she doesn't work nights anymore. She requested a shift change, took a pay cut to get it, and now she's home before sunset every single day. Because 3 months after David disappeared, Reina was driving her personal vehicle home from a grocery store when she saw 3 people hitchhiking on the side of Highway 49. A man and 2 women, all in their 20s, thumbs out, backpacks on. She drove past them without slowing down, hands gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles went white. But as she passed, she made the mistake of glancing in her rearview mirror. All 3 of them were watching her car. All 3 were smiling. And their smiles were too wide, stretched across faces that looked human but moved slightly wrong, like masks that didn't fit quite right. Reina never reported what she saw. Who would believe her? Instead, she drives a different route now, even though it adds an hour to her commute. She doesn't pick up hitchhikers anymore, doesn't stop for anyone on the side of the road, no matter how desperate they look. And late at night, when she can't sleep, she thinks about David Keller and wonders if he's still driving somewhere, trapped behind a wheel, with 3 things in his back seat that wear human faces and whisper secrets they shouldn't know. She wonders if he's still trying to escape. And she wonders what happens when he finally stops. Story 3. The Mirror House. Officer Desmond Cole had been with the New Orleans Police Department for 11 years, and in that time, he'd responded to every kind of domestic disturbance imaginable. Screaming matches, thrown dishes, physical altercations that left blood on the walls and regret in the air. But he'd never gotten a call quite like the one that came through on that humid September night at 9:34 p.m. The dispatcher's voice had an edge to it, something between confusion and concern, when she relayed the details. Couple in the Garden District reporting an intruder in their home, but they couldn't give a clear description. They said the intruder was in the reflections, and that he'd been watching them for 3 days. The dispatcher had asked if they meant security cameras or mirrors, and the woman on the phone had started crying and said, "The mirrors. He lives in the mirrors. Please send someone who'll believe us." Mental health crisis, Desmond thought. Probably drugs, maybe a psychotic break. He'd handled dozens of those. He radioed that he was responding and drove toward the address on Prytania Street, a Victorian mansion that had probably been beautiful once, but now looked tired. The kind of place that wealthy families bought with grand restoration plans that never quite materialized. Desmond pulled up to the house and immediately noticed something strange. Every window that faced the street had curtains drawn tight, but he could see light bleeding around the edges and shadows moving inside. He approached the front door, knocked, and announced himself as police. The door opened so fast, he almost drew his weapon. A man in his late 30s stood there, unshaven, eyes red-rimmed and wild. Behind him, Desmond could see a woman sitting on the stairs, hugging her knees, rocking slightly. The man, who introduced himself as Vincent Mercier, grabbed Desmond's arm with shaking hands and pulled him inside, shutting the door quickly behind him. The first thing Desmond noticed was the mirrors. They were everywhere. Floor-to-ceiling antique mirrors lined the hallway. The living room visible beyond had 3 massive gilded mirrors on different walls. And even from where he stood, Desmond could see more mirrors in the dining room, in the parlor, reflecting light and space until the house seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. The second thing he noticed was that all the mirrors were uncovered. In most of the domestic disturbance calls he'd handled involving paranoia or psychosis, people covered mirrors and windows. These were all exposed, gleaming in the lamplight. Vincent started talking immediately, words tumbling over each other. He and his wife Claire had inherited the house from his grandmother 3 months ago. She'd lived here for 40 years, alone, and when she died, they'd moved in planning to renovate and sell. The mirrors had been here when they arrived, part of the original construction from 1887. Vincent's grandmother had apparently loved them, said they made the house feel less lonely. But 3 days ago, Claire had seen someone in one of the mirrors, not a reflection of someone in the room, but someone else entirely. A man she'd never seen before, standing in the reflection of their dining room, watching her. She'd spun around, but the actual dining room was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, he was gone. Vincent had dismissed it as stress, too little sleep, her imagination playing tricks. But then he saw it too. That night, walking past the hallway mirror, he'd glimpsed himself, but his reflection had been looking at him instead of mimicking his movements. Just for a second, just long enough for Vincent to freeze and stare. And then the reflection synchronized again, matching his movements perfectly. But Vincent knew what he'd seen. His reflection had been watching him with an expression he hadn't been making, something between curiosity and hunger. Desmond listened, keeping his face neutral, his hand resting casually near his radio. This was textbook shared psychosis, folie à deux, where one person's delusion infected another. He'd seen it before in isolated couples, stress and suggestion creating shared hallucinations. He started to reassure them, to suggest they might want to speak with a crisis counselor, when Claire suddenly stood up from the stairs and pointed at the mirror behind Desmond. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the room like a knife. "He's there, right now. He's standing behind you." Desmond turned slowly, looking at the mirror she was pointing at. He saw himself in his uniform, Vincent standing to his left, Claire on the stairs in the background. Nothing unusual. He turned back to tell her the mirror was clear, and that's when he saw her face. She wasn't looking at the mirror anymore. She was looking at him with an expression of absolute terror, and she whispered words that made his skin crawl. "Officer, you need to look again. But this time, watch yourself. Watch how you move." Desmond turned back to the mirror, and this time he moved deliberately, raising his hand in a wave. His reflection waved back. He tilted his head. His reflection tilted. Everything normal. But then Vincent said, "Now lower your hand and stay completely still." Desmond lowered his hand and stood motionless, watching his reflection do the same. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then his reflection blinked. Desmond hadn't blinked. His reflection smiled slightly, a small upturn of the lips. Desmond's face was neutral. And then, while Desmond stood frozen, his reflection turned its head slowly to the left, looking at something in the mirror world that didn't exist in the real room. Desmond felt ice flood his veins. This wasn't possible. Reflections didn't move independently. They couldn't. But he was watching it happen, watching himself in the mirror, acting with autonomy, with intention. His reflection turned back to face him, and now it was, definitely smiling. And its eyes, Desmond's own eyes staring back at him from the glass, had an intelligence in them that felt foreign and ancient and wrong. Vincent whispered, "That's not the one who watches us. That's you. Or it was you. It's hard to explain." Claire's voice was shaking. "The one who watches us is different. Older. He appears in different mirrors, always in rooms we're not in, always watching. But you, officer, you're new. You just arrived. And now you're in there with him." Desmond stepped back from the mirror, and his reflection stayed where it was for just a moment longer before it started moving again, synchronizing with his movements, becoming normal. Desmond's training was screaming at him to rationalize this, to find the logical explanation. Trick mirrors, hidden cameras, some kind of prank. But he'd felt it. That moment of disconnection, that horrifying second when he'd watched himself move without moving. He pulled out his radio to call for backup, maybe a supervisor, maybe someone who could help him understand what was happening. But before he could key the mic, all the lights in the house went out. Complete darkness, sudden and total. Desmond fumbled for his flashlight, clicked it on, and the beam illuminated the hallway mirror. In the flashlight's glow, he could see 6 reflections of himself. 6 different Desmonds, all standing in slightly different positions, all looking at him from different angles. But he was alone in the hallway. Vincent and Claire had been in the living room when the lights went out. These reflections weren't mimicking him. They were surrounding him, watching him from impossible angles. And as his flashlight beam swept across the mirror, they all turned their heads in unison to follow the light. One of the reflections, the one in the center, raised its hand and pointed behind Desmond. He spun around, flashlight cutting through the darkness, and saw nothing. When he turned back to the mirror, all 6 reflections were gone. Just his own single reflection, looking terrified, which was exactly how Desmond felt. The lights flickered back on, and Vincent and Claire were suddenly in the hallway with him, though Desmond hadn't heard them approach. Vincent looked even more pale than before, and he said, "It's getting worse. He's getting stronger. Every mirror in this house is a door, and he's been using them. We think he's been taking pieces of us. Memories, maybe, or time. Claire can't remember our wedding anniversary anymore. I forgot my mother's name yesterday, and we keep seeing ourselves in mirrors. But they're not us. They're versions of us that stayed in the reflections too long, that got trapped. Desmond should have left. Every instinct told him to get out of this house, to call for a mental health unit, to let trained crisis counselors handle this. But something kept him there. Some growing certainty that what he was experiencing wasn't a shared delusion, but something far worse. He asked to see the other mirrors, the ones where they'd seen the watching man. They led him through the house, and Desmond counted the mirrors as they went. 17 in total. All antiques, all perfectly maintained. In the dining room, Claire stopped in front of a massive mirror with an ornate gold frame. She whispered, "This is where I see him most often. Just standing there, in a room that looks like this one, but isn't. The furniture is different, older, and there are other people with him sometimes. They move like they're going about their day, like they're living a life in there." Desmond approached the mirror slowly, studying it. At first, he saw only the normal reflection of the dining room, of himself and the couple standing behind him. But as he looked closer, details started to shift. The wallpaper in the reflection was a different pattern, slightly faded. The chandelier had more crystals, and in the reflection's far corner, in a space where the real room had a cabinet, there was a doorway. An open doorway leading to darkness. Desmond moved toward that corner of the actual room, keeping his eyes on the mirror. In the reflection, something moved in that doorway. A shadow, tall and thin, stepping forward into the reflected dining room. The watching man. He was elderly, dressed in clothes from another era, a suit with a high collar and a watch chain. And he was looking directly at Desmond with eyes that were completely black, no whites, no irises, just darkness. Desmond turned to look at the actual corner of the room. Empty. Just the cabinet. Just the wall. He looked back at the mirror. The man was closer now, having crossed half the distance of the reflected room in the second Desmond had looked away. He moved wrong, his gait too smooth, like he was gliding rather than walking. And behind him, through that impossible doorway, Desmond could see other figures now. Dozens of them, all watching, all waiting. Vincent's voice was tight with fear. He's showing himself to you. He doesn't usually come this close. I think he wants you to understand something. The old man in the mirror stopped about 5 feet from the glass, from his perspective, and tilted his head. Then he raised one long-fingered hand and pressed it against the surface of the mirror from his side. Desmond watched as the glass rippled slightly, like water disturbed by a stone, and he understood with sudden, absolute clarity that the mirror wasn't reflecting another room. It was a window into another room, another place that existed alongside this one, separated only by this thin barrier of silvered glass. And the barrier was weakening. Desmond stepped back, and the old man smiled, showing too many teeth, and turned away, walking back toward that dark doorway. The other figures followed him, and within seconds, the reflection returned to normal, just a mirror showing the dining room as it was. Desmond's hands were shaking. He'd been a cop for 11 years. He'd seen crime scenes that would haunt him forever. He'd talked down armed suspects and performed CPR on dying children. But nothing in his career had prepared him for this. For the understanding that reality was thinner than he'd believed. That there were spaces between spaces, and things lived in those spaces, watching, waiting. He told Vincent and Claire that they needed to leave the house, that they couldn't stay here. Claire laughed, a broken sound. We've tried. 3 times we've packed and tried to leave. But every time we get to the door, we see ourselves already in the car through the window reflection, driving away. And then we're back in the house, and hours have passed, and we don't remember anything. He's not letting us go. He's keeping us here. Desmond pulled out his phone to call his supervisor, to get people who might understand this, to do something, anything. But when he looked at his phone screen, he saw his own face looking back at him. Not a camera app, not a reflection in the black screen. His face, in full color, moving independently, mouthing words he couldn't hear. The face on his phone screen looked panicked, desperate, and it was pointing urgently at something off-screen. The phone went dead, and Desmond looked up to find that Vincent and Claire had backed away from him, pressing themselves against the wall. Claire was crying silently, and Vincent was shaking his head. "Officer, you need to look at your shadow." Desmond looked down. The overhead light was casting his shadow on the hardwood floor, but the shadow was wrong. It wasn't aligned with his body. It was standing at a different angle, and as Desmond watched in horror, it moved, sliding across the floor independent of the light source, stretching and contracting, reaching toward one of the mirrors on the wall like it was trying to get back to where it belonged. Desmond stumbled backward, and his shadow snapped back into place beneath him, normal again. But he'd felt it. That moment of disconnection. Like a part of him had tried to separate, to peel away, and go somewhere else. He was losing himself to this house, piece by piece, just like Vincent and Claire. His reflection, his shadow. Parts of him were being claimed by whatever lived in the spaces between. The rational part of Desmond's mind, the part that was trained and experienced and logical, knew he should run. But another part, a growing part, whispered that it was already too late. He'd looked into the mirrors too long. He'd seen what he wasn't supposed to see. And now the house had seen him. He was marked. He was noticed. He was becoming part of the house's collection of people and shadows and reflections that weren't quite right. Desmond forced himself to move, to walk toward the front door, to try to leave. Vincent and Claire followed, hopeful but not believing. They reached the door, and Desmond grabbed the handle. It was locked. He hadn't locked it. He had the presence of mind to check if it was a deadbolt, but no, it was just a simple lock, and he turned it and pulled, and the door opened. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the smell of magnolia and car exhaust and normality. Desmond stepped out onto the porch, and Vincent and Claire were right behind him, all three of them stumbling into the night like survivors of a shipwreck reaching shore. Desmond turned back to look at the house, and in every window, in every pane of glass, he saw faces looking out. Not Vincent and Claire's faces, not his own. Other faces. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all pressed against the glass from the inside, all watching them leave with expressions of longing and envy. Desmond got Vincent and Claire into his patrol car, called for backup, called for an ambulance, called for anyone who could help. They were taken to the hospital for evaluation, and Desmond was told to write up his report. He sat in the station at 3 a.m., staring at a blank computer screen, trying to find words that wouldn't get him committed or fired. He wrote that he'd responded to a disturbance call, that the couple appeared to be suffering from stress and possible carbon monoxide poisoning from the old house, that he'd evacuated them as a precaution. He didn't mention the mirrors. He didn't mention the reflections that moved wrong, or the shadow that tried to escape, or the old man with black eyes standing in a room that didn't exist. He didn't mention any of it, because who would believe him? But every day since that night, Desmond checks his reflection. He looks in bathroom mirrors, in car windows, in any reflective surface he passes, and he watches himself carefully. He looks for the lag, the moment when his reflection moves slightly out of sync, slightly behind or ahead. He looks for the sign that he didn't fully escape that house, that a part of him is still there, trapped in those mirrors with the old man and the watching faces. And sometimes, late at night, when he's alone and the light is just right, he sees it. His reflection moves a half-second slow. It smiles when he's not smiling. It watches him when he looks away. Desmond Cole still serves on the New Orleans Police Department, but he refused any calls on Prytania Street. The house on Prytania where Vincent and Claire lived has been abandoned for 2 years now. Vincent disappeared 6 months after that night, walked out of a grocery store and was never seen again. Claire lives in a facility now and doesn't speak anymore. She just sits in her room, facing away from the windows, away from any reflective surface, staring at a wall. And Desmond? Desmond avoids mirrors when he can. But he knows it doesn't matter. Because once you've been seen by what lives in the reflections, once you've been noticed and marked and claimed, there's nowhere you can go that doesn't have a mirror. And eventually, what's watching from the other side will find a way to reach through and pull you back to where they think you belong. It's just a matter of time. Story 4. The Last Broadcast. Officer Taryn Blackwell had been with the Vermont State Police for 4 years, and she thought she'd seen every kind of abandoned building call there was. Squatters, vandals, teenagers looking for a place to party, occasionally a vagrant who'd broken in seeking shelter from the cold. But when the silent alarm triggered at the old WKRV radio station at 1:43 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, something about it made her uneasy even before she arrived. The station had been shut down for 6 months, power cut, equipment stripped, and sold off to pay debts before the building went up for demolition. The wrecking crew was scheduled to arrive in 3 days. There was no reason for anyone to be inside. And more importantly, there was no reason for the silent alarm to even be functional. The system should have been dead, along with everything else in that building. Taryn called in her position and approached the station, a squat brick building on the edge of town that had been broadcasting since 1952. She'd listened to it as a kid, remembered the local DJ who did the morning show the way her father would have it on during breakfast. Now it sat dark and abandoned, windows boarded up, parking lot overgrown with weeds pushing through cracked asphalt. The front door was locked, but when Taryn walked around to the back, she found the rear entrance hanging open, the lock mechanism broken. Fresh damage, metal bright where it had been pried. She drew her weapon, clicked on her flashlight, and announced herself as police. No response. The building swallowed her voice, gave nothing back. She stepped inside, and immediately the temperature dropped. Not unusual for November in Vermont, but this was different. The cold inside the building had weight to it, had presence, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. Her breath misted in front of her face as she moved down the hallway, past empty offices with doors standing open, past break rooms with tables and chairs left behind, worthless enough not to bother selling. Her flashlight beam cut through absolute darkness, and in the silence she could hear her own heartbeat, her own breathing, the creak of her duty belt as she moved. She reached the main studio, and that's when she noticed the sound. Faint, almost subliminal, a low hum that she felt more than heard. It was coming from deeper in the building, from the direction of the broadcast booth. Taryn keyed her radio to report her findings, but all she got was static. She tried again, still static. The radio should have worked. She was still close enough to the repeater tower. But something in this building was interfering with the signal. She continued toward the broadcast booth, and the humming grew louder. As she got closer, she realized it wasn't just a hum. It was voices. Multiple voices, all speaking at once, too low and distorted to make out individual words. Taryn reached the door to the broadcast booth and found it closed. Through the small window in the door, she could see a faint amber glow. Impossible. The power had been cut 6 months ago. She tested the door handle, found it unlocked, and slowly pushed it open. The broadcast booth was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, with sound-dampening foam on the walls and a large window looking into the empty production room beyond. And in the center of the booth, on a table that should have been empty, sat a reel-to-reel tape machine. It was running. The reels turned slowly, feeding tape through the mechanism, and the amber glow Taryn had seen came from the VU meters, the little lights that showed audio levels. They were bouncing, registering sound, showing that something was being played or recorded. Taryn stepped closer, her mind trying to process what she was seeing. The tape machine wasn't plugged into anything. There was no power cord, no battery backup, nothing that could explain how it was operating. Yet the reels turned, steady and smooth, and from the machine's small built-in speaker came a voice. It was a woman's voice, distorted by the old equipment, but understandable. This is Officer Taryn Blackwell, badge number 2847, requesting immediate backup at WKRV radio station. Suspect is armed and I don't know what's happening. The equipment is running with no power, the temperature is dropping, and I can't reach dispatch on my radio. If anyone hears this, I'm in the broadcast booth and I need... The voice cut off, replaced by static, then resumed. Trapped. I can't get out. The doors won't open and the windows won't break, and I've been here for hours, days maybe, I don't know anymore. The tape keeps playing and it's my voice, but I haven't said these things yet, haven't recorded them. But I will because I'm hearing myself say them right now and... Static again, then sobbing. Then the message repeated from the beginning. Taryn felt ice water flood her veins. That was her voice. She was listening to herself calling for backup, describing a situation she was currently in, saying things she hadn't said yet. She stumbled backward and her foot hit something. She looked down and saw her body cam lying on the floor. She hadn't dropped it. It was still attached to her uniform. But there it was on the floor, and when she knelt to pick it up, she saw that it was damaged, cracked, like it had been there for months, exposed to moisture and decay. Taryn stood up and checked her own body cam, the one still clipped to her chest. It was recording, the little red light steady. She looked back at the one on the floor, and in the dim amber light from the tape machine, she saw that it had her name on it. Her ID number, it was hers. She was looking at her own body cam, somehow aged and damaged, lying on the floor of a room she'd entered 30 seconds ago. The tape machine continued to play her voice, describing events that hadn't happened yet. And Taryn realized with growing horror that she was listening to her future. Or a future where she'd been trapped in this room, unable to escape, recording desperate messages that somehow had been pressed into magnetic tape that predated her arrival. She reached for the door, suddenly desperate to leave, and found it locked. The handle wouldn't turn. She'd just come through that door. It had been unlocked, but now it was sealed tight. She threw her shoulder against it, once, twice, but the door didn't budge. The window was too small to crawl through, and when she tried to break it with her flashlight, the glass didn't even crack. She was trapped, exactly as her voice on the tape had described. Taryn pulled out her radio again, tried to call for help, but the static was louder now, aggressive, and underneath it she could hear voices. Not clear voices, not words. Just the impression of many people speaking at once, urgently, desperately. She turned back to the tape machine and saw that there were other tapes on the table now. She was certain they hadn't been there before. But there they sat. A stack of reel-to-reel tapes in dusty boxes, all labeled with dates. The oldest was from 1952, the year the station opened. The most recent was from today's date, tomorrow's date. Taryn picked up the tape that was currently playing, the one with her voice on it, and saw that it was labeled with tomorrow's date and a time. 2:47 a.m., an hour from now. She was listening to a recording that wouldn't be made for another hour. A recording of herself trapped in a situation she was trapped in right now. The paradox made her head hurt, made her question her sanity. She picked up another tape at random, one from 1967, and saw handwriting on the box that read, DJ Marcus, final broadcast. Her hands shaking, Taryn removed her tape from the machine and threaded in the 1967 tape. It took her 3 tries. Her fingers were trembling so badly, but she managed it. She pressed play, and after a moment of leader tape, a man's voice came through the speaker. This is Marcus Hendley, and if you're hearing this, then I'm still here. I came to the station to collect some personal items after my shift, must have been around 2 a.m., and I found equipment running in the broadcast booth. Equipment that shouldn't have power. I came in to investigate, and the door locked behind me. That was 3 days ago. 3 days. I've tried everything. The door won't open. The window won't break. My watch stopped. I can't tell if time is passing normally or not. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that I've been recording myself. Not intentionally. The equipment just runs, and it picks up everything I say, everything I do, and it presses it into tape somehow. And I don't understand how or why, but I know I'm being preserved. I'm being saved. For what? For who? The tape continued, and Taryn listened as Marcus's voice deteriorated over what he claimed were days, becoming more desperate, more unhinged. He described finding other tapes. Tapes from people he'd never met, people who'd been trapped in this room before him, all of them describing the same experience. The locked door, the running equipment, the impossible recordings. He described how he'd started to see things in the shadows of the room, movements that shouldn't be there, shapes that watched him from corners where light didn't reach. He described how his reflection in the window to the production room stopped matching his movements, how it would stand still while he paced, or pace while he stood still. And finally, toward the end of the tape, his voice dropped to a whisper, and he said something that made Taryn's blood run cold. I understand now. The station isn't just a building. It's something else. It's a collector. It's been collecting voices since it opened, collecting moments, collecting people who came here when they shouldn't have. And it preserves them. We're all still here, all of us who got trapped. We're in the tapes, in the recordings, and we play on loop forever. And the station feeds on it somehow. Feeds on the repetition, the fear, the desperation. I can feel myself becoming less real. I can feel myself becoming just a voice, just a recording. And soon that's all I'll be. Just a tape in a box that someone else will find, someone else will play, someone else will listen to before they become a tape too. The recording ended with Marcus screaming, and then silence, and then the machine clicked off. Taryn stood in the cold broadcast booth, surrounded by tapes, and understood that she was part of a collection that spanned decades. Every person who'd been curious enough or unlucky enough to enter this room at the wrong time had been trapped, recorded, and preserved. She pulled out her phone to try to call for help, but the screen was black. Dead. She pressed the power button, and nothing happened. How long had she been in this room? It felt like minutes, but her phone suggested otherwise. If it was dead, if it had run out of power, then hours must have passed. Maybe days. Time felt wrong in here, compressed and stretched simultaneously. She looked at her watch and saw that the hands weren't moving. Frozen at 1:52 a.m., 9 minutes after she'd entered the building. 9 minutes, or 9 hours, or 9 days. She had no way to know. Taryn made a decision. If she was going to be trapped, if she was going to become another tape in this collection, then she was going to leave a message that meant something. She found a microphone hanging on the wall, connected to nothing. But when she spoke into it, the VU meters on the tape machine jumped to life. Of course, the station was listening. It was always listening. She recorded everything. She stated her name, her badge number, the date and time she'd entered the building. She described the tape machine, the other tapes, Marcus's recording. She described the door that wouldn't open and the window that wouldn't break. She described her growing certainty that she was becoming unstuck from normal time, that the room existed in a space between moments where the station could preserve things indefinitely. And then she did something that Marcus hadn't done, something that maybe none of the others had thought to do. She started destroying the tapes. She pulled them from their boxes and stretched the tape, breaking it, pulling it apart, throwing the destroyed reels across the room. She destroyed dozens of them, years of collected voices, and with each one she broke, the room seemed to react. The temperature dropped further. The amber lights on the VU meters began to flicker. The shadows in the corners grew darker, more solid, and shapes began to emerge from them. Humanoid shapes, dozens of them. All the preserved voices given form, all the people who'd been trapped here over the decades. They watched her with eyes that weren't quite eyes, faces that shifted and blurred like bad reception, and they moved closer, surrounding her. Taryn kept destroying tapes, working frantically, and she felt the room fighting her. The air grew thick, resistant, like moving through water. Her movements slowed. The shapes closed in. And then she reached the tape with tomorrow's date, the one with her voice on it, the one that had been playing when she arrived. She held it in her hands, and she understood. This tape was her future. It was the recording of her being trapped, her messages of desperation, her eventual acceptance that she'd become part of the collection. If she destroyed this tape, she'd destroy that future. But maybe she'd destroy herself in the process. Maybe the tape was the only thing keeping her anchored to existence at all. The shapes were almost touching her now, their hands reaching out, their mouths opening to reveal darkness. And Taryn could hear them. All of them. All the voices from all the tapes, speaking in unison, begging her not to destroy the collection, not to erase them, because the tapes were all they had left. They weren't alive, but they weren't gone. And if the tapes were destroyed, they'd truly cease to exist. They'd become nothing, less than memory, less than echo. Taryn looked at the tape in her hands, at tomorrow's date written in handwriting that wasn't hers, but somehow was, and she made her choice. She snapped the reel in half. The reaction was immediate. The shapes screamed, a sound like tearing metal and breaking glass, and they rushed toward her, dozens of preserved voices trying to stop her from erasing herself. But as the tape broke, as the pieces fell to the floor, reality snapped back. The tape machine went silent. The amber lights died. The shapes dissolved into nothing, and the door unlocked with an audible click. Taryn stood in complete darkness, in complete silence, and she ran. She hit the door at full speed, burst through into the hallway, and sprinted toward the exit. Behind her, she could hear the building groaning, creaking, as if it was collapsing from within. She made it to the back door and tumbled out into the parking lot, into the cold November air, into reality. She looked at her watch. It read 1:58 a.m., 6 minutes. She'd been in the building for 6 minutes total. Impossible. It had been hours. It had been days. But her watch said 6 minutes, and her body cam, when she reviewed it later, confirmed it. 6 minutes of footage, all of it in the broadcast booth, all of it showing Taryn talking to herself, describing things that weren't visible on camera, destroying tapes that appeared as nothing but empty air in the recording. The Department Center for Psychological Evaluation. She was put on administrative leave. The body cam footage was classified as evidence of a mental health crisis, and Taryn was told she'd been exposed to carbon monoxide or some other toxin in the abandoned building that had caused hallucinations. She didn't argue. What could she say that wouldn't sound insane? But she knew what she'd experienced. She knew what she'd destroyed. And she knew that somewhere in that building, in the wreckage of broken tapes and dissolved shadows, was evidence of everyone who'd been trapped before her, everyone who'd been turned into recordings and preserved forever. The radio station was demolished on schedule 3 days later. The wrecking crew reported no unusual findings, just an old building with old equipment, all of it crushed and hauled away to the landfill. Taryn watched the demolition from a distance, and she felt no relief. Because late at night, when she's alone and the room is quiet, she sometimes hears it. The hum of a tape machine that isn't there. The sound of reels turning. And underneath it, very faintly, she hears her own voice describing events that haven't happened yet. The tape she destroyed was tomorrow's tape. But what about the day after? What about next week, next month, next year? How many more tapes were there with her name on them, with her voice pressed into magnetic ribbons, waiting in places she hasn't found yet? Taryn doesn't know. But she listens, late at night, to the phantom sound of machines that aren't running. And she wonders if she really escaped at all. Or if she only escaped one room in a building with infinite rooms. All of them collecting, all of them preserving, all of them waiting for the next person to walk in and become part of the broadcast that never ends. Story 5. The Passenger. Officer Isaiah Grant had been driving the same patrol route through rural Montana for 9 years, and he knew every curve, every pothole, every stretch of road where deer liked to cross in the early morning hours. He'd seen his share of strange things during those years, plenty of drunk drivers with creative excuses, a few UFO sightings that turned out to be experimental drones from the nearby Air Force Base, and once a bear that had somehow gotten itself stuck in a dumpster behind the grocery store. But he'd never picked up a hitchhiker before that October night, never broken protocol in that particular way, until the storm rolled in, and he saw the man standing on the side of Highway 287 in the pouring rain. The department had an unofficial Good Samaritan policy, something the sheriff encouraged during the brutal Montana winters when being stranded could mean death. If someone was in genuine distress and you had the capacity to help without compromising safety, you helped. The man standing in the rain looked like genuine distress. He was soaked through, no vehicle in sight, wearing a long coat that hung heavy with water, and he had his thumb out in the universal symbol for help. Isaiah pulled over, rolled down the passenger window, and asked if the man needed assistance. Up close, the man looked to be in his 50s, well-groomed despite the rain, with dark hair going gray at the temples and the kind of face that suggested intelligence and education. He smiled, a pleasant expression, and said he'd appreciate a ride to the next town if it wasn't too much trouble. His car had broken down about 5 miles back, and his phone was dead. Classic scenario. Isaiah told him to get in. The man settled into the passenger seat, dripping water onto the floor mat, and extended a hand. "Elias," he said, "thank you for stopping. Not many people would." Isaiah shook his hand, noting that Elias's grip was firm and his skin was oddly warm, despite having been standing in freezing rain. They pulled back onto the highway, and Isaiah made small talk, the kind of conversation he'd had with civilians 1,000 times. Where was Elias headed? What brought him to Montana? How long had he been stranded? Elias answered all the questions smoothly, said he was passing through on business, that his rental car had started making terrible noises and he'd pulled over before it died completely, that he'd been standing in the rain for about 20 minutes before Isaiah came along. Normal answers, reasonable answers. But something about the conversation felt off to Isaiah. Some instinct developed over 9 years of talking to people who were lying or hiding something. Elias was too calm, too composed for someone who'd just been stranded in a storm. His eyes, when they caught the light from the dashboard, seemed darker than they should be. Pupils dilated wide despite the brightness. And he kept looking at Isaiah with an intensity that went beyond normal gratitude, like he was studying him, memorizing him. 10 minutes into the drive, Elias said something that made Isaiah's hands tighten on the wheel. "You worked the Henderson case last year, didn't you? The missing girl?" Isaiah felt ice settle in his stomach. The Henderson case had been one of the worst investigations of his career. 14-year-old girl had vanished from her bedroom in the middle of the night. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses. They'd searched for weeks and found nothing. The case was still open, still unsolved, still haunting everyone who'd worked it. Isaiah asked how Elias knew about that, and Elias smiled again, that pleasant, too warm smile. "Small-town news travels. Tragic case. You did everything you could." Isaiah didn't remember the Henderson case being covered outside of local news. It certainly hadn't been national. And Elias had said he was just passing through, not a local. But maybe Isaiah was being paranoid. Maybe Elias had heard about it somehow, seen it on social media, something. He tried to brush it off, but Elias kept talking. "You found her backpack 3 weeks into the search, didn't you? In the woods about 2 miles from her house. Purple backpack with a unicorn patch. Still had her homework in it, math assignment she'd been working on the night she disappeared." That was when Isaiah knew something was very, very wrong. Those details hadn't been released to the public. The backpack had been found exactly as Elias described, but the department had kept that information confidential, part of the investigation. Only the officers directly involved knew about the purple backpack and the unicorn patch and the math homework. Isaiah's training kicked in. He kept his voice casual, kept driving, but his mind was racing. He asked Elias how he knew those details, and Elias tilted his head, studying Isaiah with those 2 dark eyes. "I know a lot of things, Isaiah. I know about the Brenner shooting in 2019, when you had to draw your weapon for the first time. I know you didn't sleep for 3 days afterward, kept seeing Marcus Brenner's face even though the shooting was ruled justified. I know you still have nightmares about it. The Brenner shooting was classified. It had involved a domestic violence call that escalated, a man with a gun, and Isaiah had fired 2 shots that saved a woman's life and ended Marcus Brenner's. It was the only time Isaiah had fired his weapon in the line of duty, and it had nearly broken him. He'd never spoken about it publicly, never even told his family the details. How could Elias possibly know? Isaiah reached for his radio, intending to call dispatch, to run Elias's name, to get back up. But before his hand reached the device, Elias spoke again. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. You'll want to hear what I have to say first." His voice had changed, lost that pleasant warmth, become something colder and more ancient. Isaiah kept one hand on the wheel and moved the other to his service weapon, unsnapping the holster retention. Elias laughed, a sound that made Isaiah's skin crawl. "You won't shoot me, Isaiah, because I'm going to tell you something you desperately want to know. I'm going to tell you where Emily Henderson is." The world seemed to stop. Emily Henderson, the missing girl. Isaiah had thought about her every day for the past year, had driven past her house countless times, hoping for some breakthrough, some clue. And now this stranger, this impossible man, who knew things he shouldn't know, was claiming he could tell Isaiah where she was. Isaiah forced himself to speak calmly, asked Elias to explain. Elias settled back in the seat, looking perfectly relaxed, and said, "She's alive. She's in a cabin about 40 miles north of here, off Forest Road 228. She's being held by a man named Robert Vickers, though that's not the name he's using locally. He has identification under the name David Chen. He's kept her alive because he likes to have someone to talk to. He's lonely, you see. Profoundly lonely. And Emily was convenient." Elias described the cabin in detail, the exact location, The layout of the interior, even the fact that Emily was being kept in a basement room with a blue door. He described Robert Vickers, his appearance, his vehicle, his patterns of behavior. And as he spoke, Isaiah felt torn between desperate hope and absolute terror, because there was no way Elias could know these things unless he was either involved in Emily's disappearance or was something else entirely. Something worse. Isaiah asked the question that was burning in his mind. Who are you? What are you? Elias turned to look at him fully, and in the glow of the dashboard lights, his face seemed to shift, to blur at the edges like Isaiah wasn't seeing him clearly. I'm someone who watches, Isaiah. I've been watching you for a very long time. I watch through eyes that aren't mine. I listen through ears that don't belong to me. And I've been following your career with great interest. You're good at what you do. You care about people. You try to save them. It's admirable. It's also delicious. Isaiah felt his blood run cold. What do you mean, you watch through eyes that aren't yours? Elias smiled again, and this time his teeth seemed too white, too numerous. I mean exactly that. Right now, I'm watching through your eyes, Isaiah. I'm seeing what you see, feeling what you feel. I've been doing it for years, riding along in your head, experiencing your life secondhand. And occasionally, when circumstances align, when the barriers between inside and outside grow thin enough, I can step out. I can manifest. I can have conversations like this one. It was impossible. It was insane. But Isaiah knew with the certainty that comes from pure instinct that Elias was telling the truth. This thing sitting in his passenger seat wasn't a man. It was something that had been living inside Isaiah's head, parasitic, watching his life unfold from behind his own eyes. And now it was here, physical, real, sitting next to him in his patrol car in the middle of a storm. Isaiah tried to stay calm, tried to think through his options. He asked why Elias was telling him about Emily Henderson, and Elias's expression became almost thoughtful. Because I want you to find her. I want you to save her. I want to feel what you feel when you bring her home, when her parents cry with relief, when you realize you've done something genuinely good. I feed on experiences, you see, on emotions. And strong emotions, pure emotions like the ones you're about to feel, those are rare and precious. I want to taste them through you. The car felt too small, the air too thin. Isaiah was breathing hard, hands gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles were white. He asked if everything Elias had said about Emily was true, if she was really in that cabin, and Elias nodded. Every word. I don't lie, Isaiah. I observe, I experience, but I don't create false information. Emily Henderson is alive, and if you act quickly, you can save her. That's what you do, isn't it? You save people. Or at least, you try. Isaiah made a decision. He couldn't trust Elias, couldn't trust anything about this situation. But if there was even a chance that Emily was alive, he had to follow up. He reached for his radio, and this time, Elias didn't stop him. But when Isaiah keyed the mic to call dispatch, all he got was silence. Dead air. The radio was on. The light indicated it was transmitting, but no sound came through. He tried again. Nothing. Elias watched him with amusement. Oh, I'm afraid that won't work right now. We're in a bubble, you and I. A little pocket of space where normal rules don't quite apply. Your radio won't reach anyone until I'm gone. Your phone won't work either, if you try it. This moment, this conversation, it exists outside of time in a way. When we're done, everything will return to normal. But for now, it's just us. Isaiah looked at the road ahead, looked at the storm battering the windshield, looked at Elias sitting calmly beside him, and he felt reality fracturing around him. He asked how long Elias had been watching him, and Elias considered the question. "Since you were a child. I found you when you were 8 years old. Did you remember? You were alone in your room, thinking about becoming a police officer when you grew up, imagining yourself helping people. That moment, that pure intention, it drew me to you. I slipped inside, quiet as thought, and I've been there ever since. I've seen everything you've seen, felt everything you've felt. Your first kiss, your graduation, your father's funeral, the moment you realized you wanted to marry Sarah, the birth of your daughter. I was there for all of it, experiencing it through you." Isaiah thought he might be sick. This thing had been inside his head for decades, watching his most private moments, feeling his deepest emotions. It was a violation beyond anything he could articulate, a rape of his very consciousness. He asked what Elias wanted from him, why Elias had manifested now, and Elias's smile faded. "Because I'm dying, Isaiah. Or something like dying. I'm fading. My kind, we're not meant to stay in one host forever. We're supposed to move, to experience different lives, different perspectives. But I stayed with you too long. I became too attached to your particular flavor of consciousness. And now I'm bound to you in a way that's killing us both. Eventually, I'll fade completely, and when I do, I'll take pieces of you with me. Memories, probably. Emotions. Parts of your personality. You'll survive, but you'll be less than you were. Unless..." He trailed off, and Isaiah felt dread settle even deeper. Unless what? Elias looked at him with something that might have been regret. "Unless I can transfer to someone else. Someone close to you. Someone whose consciousness is similar enough to yours that I can make the jump. Someone like your daughter." Isaiah's foot slammed on the brake without conscious thought. The patrol car skidded on the wet road, fishtailed, and came to a stop sideways across both lanes. Isaiah drew his weapon, pointed it directly at Elias, hands shaking with rage and terror. "You stay away from her. You stay the hell away from my daughter." Elias didn't seem concerned about the gun. "I'm not threatening her, Isaiah. I'm simply explaining the situation. I don't want to jump to your daughter. I don't want to abandon you. But my survival instinct is strong, and when I start to fade, really fade, I may not have control over where I go. Your daughter is 7 years old. Her mind is open, malleable, perfect for someone like me. If I jumped to her, I could stay for another 70 years, experiencing life through her eyes the way I've experienced it through yours. But if that happens, you'll lose me. You'll lose all the memories of the times I was watching most intently. And your daughter, she'll never even know I'm there. She'll live her whole life with me as a passenger, just like you did." Isaiah felt tears burning in his eyes. He'd never known about Elias, never suspected he wasn't alone in his own head. And now he was being told that this parasite might jump to his daughter, might infect her the way it had infected him. He asked if there was another option, any other way. Elias nodded slowly. "There is. I can fade naturally. I can let myself die or cease or whatever happens to things like me. But if I do that consciously, if I choose to let go, I'll need something in return. I'll need one perfect moment, one experience so powerful, so pure, that it sustains me through the dissolution. That's why I told you about Emily Henderson. Save her, Isaiah. Bring her home. Let me feel what you feel when you reunite her with her family. Give me that moment, and I'll let go. I'll fade away and leave you and your daughter alone." Isaiah sat in the stalled car, rain hammering the roof, gun still pointed, at Elias, and tried to process everything. This could all be delusion, psychosis, a complete break from reality. But it felt real. Elias felt real. And the information about Emily Henderson was too specific, too detailed to be fabrication. Isaiah asked how he could trust Elias to keep his word, to fade away after Emily was found. Elias met his gaze, and for the first time, his expression seemed genuinely sincere. "You can't trust me, Isaiah. Not really. I'm a parasite, a consciousness that feeds on your experiences. But I'm also tired. I've been riding in your head for 31 years, and I'm ready to rest. Give me this one thing, this one perfect moment of salvation and joy, and I'll give you back your solitude. You'll be alone in your own mind for the first time since you were 8 years old." Doesn't that sound appealing? It did. It sounded like freedom. It also sounded like a trap. But Isaiah didn't see another option. He lowered his weapon, put the car back in drive, and continued toward town. He asked Elias for the exact location of the cabin again, memorized every detail, and started planning the rescue operation in his head. When they reached the outskirts of town, Elias asked Isaiah to pull over. "This is where I get out. When I leave this car, I'll slip back inside you, back into my usual place in your consciousness. You won't remember this conversation clearly. It'll feel like a dream, like something that might not have happened. But you'll remember the location of the cabin. You'll remember Emily Henderson can be saved. And when you save her, I'll feel it. And then I'll let go." Isaiah pulled over, and Elias opened the door. Before he got out, he turned back one last time. "It's been an honor, Isaiah. Truly. You've given me a life I never could have had on my own. Whatever I am, wherever I came from, these 31 years with you have been precious. Thank you." And then he was gone, dissolving into the rain, like he'd never been there at all. Isaiah sat alone in the patrol car, and slowly, the world returned to normal. His radio crackled to life with dispatch checking on his status. His phone showed full signal. The clock on the dashboard indicated that only 3 minutes had passed since he'd picked up the hitchhiker, though the conversation had felt like it lasted half an hour. Isaiah looked at the passenger seat. It was dry. No water from Elias's soaked coat, no indication anyone had been sitting there at all. But in his mind, crystal clear and undeniable, was the location of a cabin on Forest Road 228, and the certainty that Emily Henderson was there, alive, waiting to be found. Isaiah called it in. He requested backup, contacted the FBI field office, and organized a tactical response. 6 hours later, they raided the cabin. They found Emily Henderson in a basement room with a blue door, exactly as described. They arrested Robert Vickers, who had identification under the name David Chen, exactly as described. Emily was malnourished and traumatized, but alive. And when Isaiah carried her out of that cabin and saw her parents' faces as they were reunited, he felt joy so pure and powerful it almost hurt. And in that moment, he felt something else. A presence in his mind, one he'd never noticed before, suddenly becoming aware of itself, becoming visible for just a second before it faded away. Like a weight lifting. Like a breath he'd been holding for 3 decades, finally released. Isaiah drove home that night in complete silence. No radio, no music, just the sound of his own thoughts. And for the first time in his life, his thoughts felt entirely his own. He never saw Elias again. He never picked up another hitchhiker. And he never told anyone about what happened that night. Because how could he explain it? How could he prove it? His body cam, When he checked the footage later, showed 14 minutes of dead air starting from the moment he pulled over to pick up the hitchhiker. 14 minutes of static, and then the feed returned to normal with Isaiah sitting alone in his car, calling in the tip about Emily Henderson's location. No passenger, no conversation, no proof. But Isaiah knew. And sometimes, late at night, when his daughter was asleep and his wife was beside him and the house was quiet, Isaiah would sit in the dark and appreciate the silence in his own head. The beautiful, precious silence of being truly alone with himself. And he'd wonder what Elias had been, where creatures like him came from, and how many other people were walking around with passengers in their consciousness, never knowing they weren't experiencing life alone. He'd wonder, and then he'd let it go, because some questions don't have answers worth finding. Some things are better left in the dark where they belong.